Carlo, an Italian artilleryman, vividly recalled the surrender of his unit in Tunisia in May 1943. Anticipating execution, he was met instead with American kindness, water, cigarettes, and efficient, humane treatment during transport to a transit camp near Oran. 3 weeks of clean water, regular food, and proper medical care solidified this unexpected pattern. The subsequent 11-day voyage across the Atlantic, sharing a hold with 200 other Italian POWs, further challenged his wartime assumptions. The daily provisions, exceeding what he'd eaten in months, slowly quelled fears of poison or starvation. Fellow prisoners debated their fate. Some feared harsher labor camps, others hoped for quick release due to Italy's co-belligerent status. They docked in Norfolk, Virginia, in early September. The humid heat was a stark contrast to the Mediterranean. 2 days of processing followed, where American officers calmly recorded names and ranks without any brutality. Carlo, unable to fully read the English papers, signed. Then a train journey westward revealed an America seemingly untouched by war, vast farmlands, intact towns, functional factories, and no signs of destruction or refugees. On September 18th, Carlo arrived at Camp Hereford in Texas, a temporary-looking facility with wooden barracks, a single fence, and widely spaced guard towers. There were no machine guns or searchlights, and guards carried rifles casually. Major Stevens, the commandant, addressed them through an interpreter, announcing work details on local farms to address a wartime labor shortage. Pay would be minimal, male privileges allowed, and Geneva Convention rules applied. Carlo, braced for threats, was instead dismissed to barracks that offered wooden floors, bunk beds with thin mattresses and blankets, a coal stove, and screened windows. The latrines even boasted running water and flush toilets, a shocking luxury in a prison camp. The next morning, at 6 a.m., breakfast was served: oatmeal, bacon, white bread, and weak but hot coffee. Portions were generous, far exceeding army rations. Carlo ate slowly, wary of propaganda's warnings about American processed food, but found his stomach eager for more. Other prisoners, years of deprivation behind them, ate ravenously. A bored guard watched from the doorway, offering no interference. Carlo, confused by the guard's simple nod, returned it with an automatic reflex. Work details began the following Monday. Carlo and 19 others were driven to a cotton ranch 15 miles away. Foreman Sullivan, a man of few Italian words, demonstrated cotton harvesting. The grueling work under the Texas sun was regularly punctuated by water breaks and ice-cold thermoses at midday. Carlo savored the melting ice, a luxury in his Neapolitan childhood. Sullivan's friendly demeanor, despite language barriers, continued to baffle Carlo. They worked until 4 p.m., returned to camp, and were met with a dinner of beef stew, potatoes, carrots, and buttered bread. On October 2nd, Carlo wrote his first letter home. His mother, in German-occupied Naples, facing severe food shortages and constant bombing, wouldn't believe the abundance he experienced. He cautiously wrote about his safety, adequate food, and fair treatment, omitting the full extent of his comfortable confinement. He expected censorship. 3 weeks passed with no mail for him or most other prisoners, confirming the collapse of postal services. Carlo ceased expecting contact. His world was now this strange camp where enemies acted as indifferent supervisors. Then, on October 14th, a new poster appeared on the mess hall notice board announcing a community dance for Saturday, October 23rd, involving Italian service units and local ladies. Private DeLucci, an American interpreter of Italian descent, explained the town of Hereford, population 3,800, was hosting the social event. Camp authorities had approved supervised attendance for Italian prisoners to dance, converse, and enjoy refreshments with local women. Carlo's mind reeled. Dancing with American women? Mussolini's propaganda had painted them as either degenerate or frigid, unthinkable for Italian soldiers, yet a signed authorization from Major Stevens legitimized it. Reactions among prisoners varied. Some scoffed, calling it a trick or a loyalty test. Others mocked the very idea, but a few, like Sergeant Tomasini, eagerly sought to volunteer. Carlo, aged 22, and having lost 3 years of normal young manhood to war, felt a deep pull. No cafes, music, or girls, just mud, fear, and hunger. Now this impossible offer hung in Texas. The dance became the dominant topic in the following week. 40, then 60, then 90 prisoners volunteered. Heated arguments broke out. Hardline fascists branded volunteers as traitors, while others argued Italy itself had betrayed them. Work details provided further insight. Foreman Sullivan casually mentioned his daughter Betty would attend, showing Carlo a photograph of her smiling in a Sunday dress. Sullivan's genuine pleasure at the prospect of Italians meeting his daughter bewildered Carlo. In Italy, fathers fiercely protected their daughter's honor. Corporal Vito, an English-speaking prisoner, reported that American guards found the dance entirely normal, explaining that with local men overseas, the community sought social events and supervised Italian prisoners, now considered co-belligerents, were acceptable partners. This logic, strange and American, made little sense to Carlo. War meant enemies, didn't it? By October 20th, Carlo had signed the volunteer list, a momentous and terrifying decision. Camp authorities laid out expectations: clean uniforms, visible POW armbands, guard supervision, no alcohol, respectful behavior. Violations meant an end to future privileges. Major Stevens personally addressed them, emphasizing that this was an act of hospitality, not a right, and that their behavior reflected Italy as co-belligerents, not fascist enemies. Stevens was serious. Carlo slept little for 2 nights, meticulously preparing his uniform, shaving closely, and polishing his boots. The evening of the dance, 87 Italian prisoners boarded trucks, escorted by 12 guards, for the 30-minute drive into Hereford. The setting sun cast an orange glow over the grasslands. The small town's community hall glowed with lights. As Carlo stepped from the truck, his heart pounded to jazzy, upbeat music drifting from the hall. American guards formed a casual board perimeter. Inside, the festooned hall held a 4-piece band, refreshment tables, and dozens of women, young and middle-aged, dressed up, talking and laughing. They turned to watch the Italians enter, smiling, curious, friendly, welcoming smiles. An older woman, perhaps the mayor's wife, approached with De Lucci. She welcomed them, and De Lucci translated. She introduced several young women, including Mary, a brunette in blue who met Carlo's eyes directly and smiled. In Naples, unmarried women didn't meet strange men's gazes. Here, Mary extended her hand. Carlo, touching her warm skin, mumbled broken English. Mary laughed, genuinely amused, and De Lucci translated her question. "Do you dance?" Carlo nodded, recalling his mother's lessons. Mary gestured to the dance floor. The guards were not interfering. Other prisoners were already engaged in hesitant conversations. The band began a slower song. Carlo made a decision that shattered his understanding of enemies, war, and the propaganda-fueled chasms between people. He offered his arm. Mary took it. As they walked to the dance floor, Carlo Rossi, prisoner of war, enemy soldier, defeated Italian corporal, danced with an American girl in the heart of Texas, armed guards watching with approval. 3 years of war had not prepared him for this. Everything he believed crumbled. The music played, the world inverted, and Carlo found himself on the precipice of a bewildering, terrifying, and wonderfully confusing realization. The simple certainties of war were dissolving. In February 1944, Carlo Rossi, an Italian POW at Camp Hereford, was assigned to a farm detail, working alongside local ranchers for the spring planting season. At the Henderson Ranch, Carlo encountered mechanical cotton planters, a stark contrast to the small, hand-tilled farm his father managed in Italy. Mr. Henderson, a weathered 50-year-old, treated the POWs like his own hired hands, sharing coffee and discussing soil conditions. When Carlo mentioned his family's 3-acre farm, Henderson paused, then commented on European poverty, a concept Carlo didn't fully grasp. That weekend, Carlo received $6, a pound of ground beef, and an invitation to Sunday dinner with the Hendersons, where Mary Sue, a family friend, would also be present. The Sunday dinner challenged Carlo's perception of American materialism. Mrs. Henderson served a feast: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, canned green beans, fresh biscuits, apple pie, and real coffee. Mr. Henderson's simple grace, thanking God for the food and asking protection for all soldiers, including those from the Axis, left Carlo speechless. Mary Sue sat across from him, and they conversed freely. Mrs. Henderson inquired about Carlo's family and the bombing of Naples. When Carlo described Italy's food shortages, she insisted he take extra servings. Despite their son fighting in North Africa, potentially against Carlo's former comrades, the Hendersons showed him profound hospitality. March saw the expansion of the camp's recreation program. Lieutenant Colonel Watkins authorized an Italian POW orchestra. Carlo, playing mandolin, discovered 12 musicians among the 300 prisoners. Salvatore Benedetti, a pre-war professional violinist, was among them. The Red Cross provided instruments. The orchestra rehearsed Italian opera, American popular songs, and enthusiastic, if awkward, swing arrangements. On March 18th, a concert for 150 local civilians, including Mary Sue and her parents, drew applause for the Italian prisoners. After, civilian women from the Hereford Presbyterian Church served refreshments, and Carlo observed Corporal Giuseppe Romano dancing with Miss Patricia Clark, a schoolteacher. Romano later revealed he had permission to correspond with Miss Clark, letters subject to censorship and non-military content. The camp store, open Wednesdays and Saturdays, allowed Carlo to spend his farm wages on items unavailable in wartime Italy. For 80 cents, he bought Camel cigarettes, Hershey chocolate bars, Colgate toothpaste, and a Life magazine. The magazine's photos of the Allied advance in Italy filled him with worry for his family. He developed a taste for Coca-Cola, seeing it as quintessentially American. He also purchased writing paper and ink, sending carefully worded letters home, approved by censors within 2 days. His mother's replies, arriving 6 weeks later via the Red Cross, described Naples under Allied occupation, a mix of defeat and salvation. She wrote of American soldiers sharing rations, electricity restored, and asked about his treatment. Carlo struggled to respond honestly without appearing disloyal or ungrateful. In April, retired English teacher Miss Eleanor Hartley began volunteering to teach conversational English to POWs. 23 Italians attended, and Carlo's English rapidly improved. Miss Hartley used flashcards, workbooks, and American newspapers, correcting pronunciation gently and treating them with pedagogical patience. In one lesson, Carlo asked how to express his desire to court Mary Sue Henderson. Miss Hartley, after a thoughtful pause, spent 15 minutes teaching him the formal phrases, explaining American dating customs, chaperones, respectful intentions, and the legal complexities of a POW marrying an American citizen. The possibility of POW marriages came from Sergeant Benedetto Marconi, a career soldier captured in Tunisia, who worked in the camp administrative office. On April the 12th, while Carlo was assisting with mail, Marconi showed him a letter from Camp Como, Mississippi. An Italian corporal, Luigi Fontana, had received U.S. Army permission to marry an American woman, Sarah Jean Williams. The wedding would be in the camp chapel, with Fontana agreeing to remain in U.S. custody until the war's end or repatriation, whichever his wife preferred. Marconi explained that the US military permitted such marriages if genuine affection was demonstrated, the American family consented, and the POW had exemplary conduct, reasoning that married POWs were less likely to cause trouble or attempt escape. Marconi mentioned at least 6 other Italian POWs in various camps across the US who were engaged or married. This information fundamentally shifted Carlo's perspective, transforming his temporary internment into a potential path to permanent immigration. He spent a sleepless night contemplating possibilities unimaginable when he surrendered 8 months prior. Mussolini's propaganda had painted America as morally corrupt, yet Carlo experienced generosity, abundant resources, and social freedoms that made fascist Italy seem backward. He considered Mary Sue's directness, her education, and her expectation of choosing her own husband. He thought of the Henderson Ranch's advanced machinery, the camp's medical care, and America's ability to feed enemy prisoners better than Italy fed its own citizens. This internal conflict intensified in discussions with fellow POWs. Some, like Romano and Corporal Antonio Greco, eagerly embraced American culture, attending English classes and openly discussing staying in the US post-war. Others, like Sergeant Pietro Conti, remained fiercely loyal to Italy, refusing English classes beyond basic commands and viewing friendly American interactions as betrayal. Conti argued that accepting American hospitality dishonored their military service, that American abundance exploited global resources, and that true patriots would maintain distance from their captors. Carlo found himself sympathetic to both sides. He felt genuine affection for Mary Sue and gratitude towards the Hendersons, yet guilt about his comfort while his family suffered in Naples. He appreciated American abundance, but questioned its compatibility with the spiritual values he held dear. Farm work continued through April, and Carlo's relationship with Mary Sue developed within the bounds of chaperoned American courtship. The Hendersons allowed them walks on the ranch as long as Mrs. Henderson was within sight. Mary Sue spoke of her plans to study agricultural science at Texas Tech, ambitions that surprised Carlo, as Italian women of her social class typically married after basic education. She inquired about his future, a question Carlo struggled to answer, his fate tied to decisions beyond his control. He explained potential repatriation, prosecution for surrender, and the need for military and immigration approval to remain in America. Mary Sue listened intently, then asked, "But what do you want to do?" This American emphasis on individual desire over family obligation or state directive highlighted a significant philosophical difference that Carlo was just beginning to grasp. On April the 28th, Carlo took a momentous step, formally requesting Mr. Henderson's permission to court Mary Sue with the intention of marriage. He practiced Miss Hartley's phrases, donned his cleanest uniform, and waited for Mr. Henderson to finish his evening chores. In the barn, while helping store equipment, Carlo stammered through his carefully prepared statement. Mr. Henderson, after a nearly 2-minute silence, asked 3 questions. "Do you love my daughter? Will you provide for her? Will you treat her as an equal partner rather than property?" Carlo answered yes to all, and Henderson extended a firm handshake, a sign of consent in American masculine culture. Henderson added that Mary Sue's final decision was paramount, her happiness outweighing paternal approval, and that Carlo should understand the independence of American women. This final comment, a blend of warning and acceptance, left Carlo returning to Camp Hereford with the realization that his life had transformed from a POW to a potential immigrant husband, a future he now desperately pursued. The war concluded for most Italian prisoners in Texas on May 8, 1945, with news of Germany's surrender. Italian POWs like Carlo Rossi, captured in Tunisia in May 1943, gathered in mess halls across the American Southwest, absorbing the historic announcement. However, jubilation was replaced by confusion. Italy had switched sides in September 1943, transforming these enemy combatants into Italian service units working alongside American forces. Now, with the war truly over, they faced a critical decision: return to a devastated homeland or build new lives in a country that had shown them unexpected generosity. Repatriation began within weeks, scheduled to return most Italian POWs by year's end. Yet those who had formed genuine relationships with American families, especially romantic ones, found themselves in bureaucratic, uncharted territory. While fraternization was technically prohibited, enforcement had been lax in rural areas where Italian labor was vital. The War Department, under pressure from both POWs and American families, quietly approved individual petitions for extended stays. Carlo's petition, filed in August 1945, required extensive documentation: employment proof from Mary Sue's father, character references from Hereford residents, and military intelligence clearance. This process spanned 8 months, leaving him in a peculiar limbo at Camp Hereford, no longer fully a prisoner, yet not entirely free. Similar cases emerged across the Southwest. Antonio Talia at Camp Hereford, Texas, sought to marry Lillian Schmidt, whose family farm he had worked on for 18 months. Giuseppe Buonpagni at Camp Florence, Arizona, petitioned to wed Helen Krecker, daughter of a Phoenix grocer. These multiplying cases created administrative challenges for the unprepared War Department. The Italian government, struggling with post-war reconstruction under Allied occupation, offered conflicting advice. Some officials encouraged emigration to ease population pressure, while others condemned those choosing America as betraying Italian honor. For Carlo and his compatriots, the decision transcended politics. Returning to Italy in 1945 meant confronting a nation in ruins. Naples, Carlo's hometown, had been ravaged by Allied bombing in 1943 and systematic German destruction. His family home was gone. His father had died from malnutrition in 1944. His 2 brothers had vanished in the chaos of the Italian Civil War, one fighting for the fascist Italian Social Republic, the other with partisan forces. Letters from his mother, delivered via the Red Cross, depicted a grim reality: chronic food shortages, widespread unemployment, and deep divisions. She discouraged his return, urging him to seize any opportunity America offered. Carlo's petition was approved in April 1946, contingent on his marriage to an American citizen and proof of self-supporting employment. The wedding took place on April 14, 1946, at Hereford's Sacred Heart Catholic Church, attended by 60 guests, including former camp guards. In June 1946, he received his alien registration card, officially changing his status from prisoner of war, Italian service unit, to resident alien, Italian national. The 5-year waiting period for naturalization began immediately. He became an American citizen in 1951. His integration into Texas agricultural life was smoother than anticipated. 3 years working on Mary Sue's family farm had equipped him with knowledge of cotton cultivation, cattle management, and panhandle weather. He spoke functional English, though his Neapolitan accent remained. By 1948, Carlo and Mary Sue bought 40 acres next to her family's property, financed by a veterans agricultural loan program accessible to Italian ex-POWs under special provisions. They raised Hereford cattle, grew cotton and grain sorghum, and employed 3 seasonal workers by 1950. Their first child, Michael Anthony, was born in November 1947, followed by Angela Maria in 1950 and Catherine Rose in 1953. Carlo insisted his children learn both English and Italian, although his daughters later recalled his Italian lessons were a blend of Neapolitan dialect and fragmented standard Italian. He shared Italian folk songs, cooked Neapolitan dishes on Sundays, and corresponded with his mother until her death in 1958. However, he steadfastly refused to visit Italy. When Mary Sue suggested a trip in 1960, he declined without explanation. Friends speculated he feared being unable to leave again, or that seeing a rebuilt Italy would undermine his past choice. Similar trajectories were observed among other Italian ex-POWs who remained in America. Government records indicate approximately 500 Italian POWs petitioned to stay in the United States between 1945 and 1947, with about 320 approvals. The majority settled in Texas, Arizona, California, and Colorado, areas where they had established community connections during their captivity. Angelo Ottavio, captured at Kasserine Pass in February 1943, married Marie Teresa Johnson in Pueblo, Colorado in January 1947 and worked at the CF&I steel mill for 33 years. Gino Merli, a POW at Camp Clark in Missouri, married Hazel Richardson and became a successful building contractor in Joplin. Vincenzo Luca, who worked at Camp Monticello in Arkansas, married Ruth Williams and operated a restaurant in Little Rock from 1948 until his retirement in 1979. These men rarely spoke publicly about their POW origins. Census records from 1950 often listed them simply as Italian immigrants, without distinguishing between voluntary arrivals and those who came as prisoners. Their children grew up with fragmented stories of North African capture, Texas farm work, and unexplained chronological gaps their parents avoided discussing. For many, the full realization of their father's POW status emerged only through genealogical research decades later, or via interviews conducted by historians in the 1990s and 2000s. The contrast between these successful integrations and the experiences of Italian POWs who returned home was profound. Repatriation ships, beginning in July 1945, transported thousands of Italians across the Atlantic to Naples, Genoa, and Taranto. They arrived to cities with 50 to 70% of their housing destroyed. Rome, though less damaged by bombing, suffered from severe overcrowding and food shortages. Northern industrial cities like Milan and Turin faced mass unemployment due to damaged factories and scarce raw materials. The lira had collapsed, with black markets dominating commerce. Returning POWs found their carefully saved American camp wages converted into nearly worthless currency. Many faced political suspicion. Those who had fought for Mussolini until 1943 were scorned by partisan groups. Those who had switched sides and worked with Americans were sometimes accused of collaboration by die-hard fascist remnants. This polarization ran deep. While Christian Democrats won national elections in 1946, communist partisans held significant influence in the North. Returning POWs often found their families aligned with opposing factions, their homes requisitioned and job prospects non-existent. Some who had spent years in American camps receiving regular meals and wages were accused by struggling relatives of enjoying comfortable captivity while Italy suffered. Veterans organizations were divided along political lines, offering little unified support. Many repatriated POWs emigrated again within 5 years, seeking opportunities in Argentina, Venezuela, Australia, and Canada. Some eventually reached the United States through normal immigration channels in the 1950s, joining established Italian-American communities. The impact of their prior POW status on immigration applications remains unclear, as most apparently did not disclose it. The Italian POW experience in America significantly influenced post-war immigration policy and Cold War POW treatment. The success of work programs in 511 U.S. camps demonstrated that former enemy combatants could be productively integrated into American society with proper oversight and community acceptance. This lesson later informed Operation Paperclip, which brought German scientists to America, and subsequent programs for Hungarian refugees after 1956 and Cuban exiles after 1959. The precedent that humanely treated enemy soldiers might choose American values over their homeland became a cornerstone of Cold War propaganda. Voice of America broadcasts to Eastern Europe frequently referenced Italian and German POW experiences, highlighting American adherence to Geneva Convention standards and post-war integration opportunities. Military training programs developed POW handling protocols based on World War II successes, emphasizing that humane treatment yielded intelligence cooperation and reduced escape attempts. These protocols were codified in updated Army field manuals in 1952 and 1956, directly citing Italian service unit cooperation rates. The stark contrast with Soviet treatment of German POWs, where death rates exceeded 30% and repatriations extended into the late 1950s, provided powerful propaganda value throughout the 1950s. American officials repeatedly used Italian repatriation statistics in UN discussions to highlight Western humanitarian superiority. The agricultural communities where Italians had worked also experienced lasting changes. In Texas, Arizona, and California, wartime labor shortages filled by POWs led to a rapid expansion of Mexican bracero programs once the prisoners left. This established migrant labor patterns that defined southwestern agriculture for decades. Some scholars contend that Italian POW productivity demonstrated the feasibility of large-scale temporary agricultural labor programs, contributing to the bracero program's expansion from 50,000 workers in 1944 to 450,000 by 1956. Furthermore, the presence of Italian POWs introduced lasting cultural elements. Towns like Hereford, Texas, and Florence, Arizona, developed Italian restaurants, often run by ex-POWs or their families. Annual Italian festivals, beginning in the 1960s in communities such as Pueblo, Colorado, and McAlester, Oklahoma, celebrated Italian-American heritage, while also acknowledging the unusual connection to POW labor. Former camps occasionally became sites of historical commemoration. Camp Hereford's administrative building, standing until 1987, featured a 1976 plaque installed by the Hereford Historical Society acknowledging Italian POW contributions to Deaf Smith County agriculture. Similar memorials were erected at Camp Florence, Arizona, and Camp Hearn, Texas. However, comprehensive historical documentation remained sparse until the 1990s. Academic interest in Italian POW experiences emerged gradually. Arnold Kramer's Prisoners on the Home Front, 1979, was the first scholarly study documenting conditions in American POW camps. Kramer interviewed surviving Italian and German ex-POWs, including those who had remained in America, revealing that approximately 425,000 Axis POWs were held in the US during the war, with Italians peaking at roughly 51,000. Subsequent research by historians like Louis Kiefer and Flavio Conti expanded specific understanding of Italian experiences. Kiefer's Italian Prisoners of War in America, 1992, documented marriage cases, identifying 87 confirmed marriages between Italian POWs and American women, likely an undercount due to incomplete records. Conti's Italian language study, I Prigionieri Dimenticati, The Forgotten Prisoners, 1986, interviewed returnees to Italy, detailing their struggles with reintegration and economic hardship. These academic works finally provided the historical context that children of ex-POWs had lacked. Many second-generation Italian Americans discovered their father's POW status only through university archives or museum exhibits in the 1990s and 2000s. These revelations often came as a profound shock, explaining decades of paternal silence about wartime experiences and occasional cryptic comments about American camps. Oral history projects at the University of Texas, Arizona State University, and Kansas State University collected hundreds of hours of testimony from surviving ex-POWs and their families between 1995 and 2010. These archives now serve as primary sources for understanding Italian POW perspectives on captivity, work assignments, community relationships, marriage decisions, and post-war integration. Carlo Rossi died in September 1984 at 68, having lived 39 years as an American citizen and 41 years total in the United States. His obituary in the Hereford brand newspaper made no mention of his POW origins, identifying him simply as a respected cattleman and longtime Hereford resident, survived by his wife Mary Sue, 3 children and 7 grandchildren. The full story emerged only after his daughter Catherine began researching family history in 2003. She discovered her father's POW records at the National Archives, his alien registration documents, and his naturalization certificate. She also found letters he had written to his mother between 1946 and 1958, stored in a private box. These Italian letters expressed gratitude for his survival, guilt over his brother's fates, and profound ambivalence about his choice to remain in America. In a 1952 letter, he wrote to his mother, "I think sometimes I betrayed Italy by staying here, but then I look at my son and my daughters, and I think maybe this was what I was supposed to survive for, not to return and starve, but to build something new." Catherine donated these materials to the deaf Smith County Historical Museum in 2005, forming the basis for an exhibit on Italian POW labor in the Texas Panhandle. Similar exhibits now exist at Camp Hereford in Texas, Camp Florence in Arizona, and Camp Ruston in Louisiana. These displays acknowledge a largely forgotten aspect of World War II history. Thousands of Axis POWs who experienced America not as conquerors or tourists, but as prisoners who discovered unexpected humanity in a nation they had been taught to view as an enemy. Their choice to stay and the American community's willingness to accept them demonstrated that even total war need not preclude reconciliation, that former enemies could become neighbors, and that the rigid boundaries between victor and vanquished could be permeated by the ordinary human desires for safety, opportunity, and love.